Reason number one, the manger is very important is this. It was a sign. The virgin birth was a sign. The virgin birth was a very important sign that God had given to the Jews. And you know the story. God had promised Eve that there would be one from her seed that would crush the head of the serpent. He gave them a picture to understand that promise, that the one who would come to crush the head of the serpent would shed his innocent blood so that the guilty could be forgiven. God had promised to Abraham that all the families of the earth would be blessed through his offspring. The one who was coming would bless every family of the earth. God promised David that the one who was coming would be a king that would rule an everlasting kingdom. And so the people of God, the Israelites, God's covenant people, walked in God's promises for hundreds of years. There was a king named Ahaz who wasn't really a good guy. He was surrounded by three armies. Ahaz was king of Judah. Three armies surrounded him. And the prophet Isaiah came to Ahaz and said, Ahaz, these kings are not going to destroy you. Just ask God for a sign. God says you can ask for anything at all. Blank check. Ask God to give you a sign. Now, I don't know about you, but if a prophet of the Lord came to me and said, Joel, ask the Lord for any sign, I would ask him for $50 million. I'm not a horrible person. Some of you would too. Ahaz, though, a wicked king who did not love the Lord, said, no, I'm not going to ask for a sign. God responded to King Ahaz and said, okay, buddy, if you won't ask for a sign, then I'll give you a sign. But it won't be a sign of your deliverance. It'll be a sign that I am about to judge the wickedness of my covenant people. If you look at Isaiah chapter 7, verses 13 through 14, this is what God said to Ahaz. Hear then, O house of David, is it too little for you to weary men that you weary me, worry my God also? Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. Then Isaiah begins to unpack this sign. This one who is born of a virgin is going to be a stumbling stone for the Jews, a sign of judgment. Isaiah chapter 8, verse 14, look at this. He will become a sanctuary and a stone of offense and a rock of stumbling to both houses of Israel, a trap and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Now, when Jesus came, we know that Jesus preached, repent. Matthew chapter 4, verse 17, it says that from that time, Jesus began to preach, saying, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Why? He was the one born of a virgin. He was the sign that God was getting ready to judge his covenant people. Matthew 15:24, Jesus answered, he said, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Matthew 10:5 through 6. These 12 Jesus sent out, instructing them, go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Jesus taught in parables, and when his disciples asked him, why do you teach in parables? They're hard to understand. Jesus said, because if I spoke in plain language, they would repent. So I speak to them in parables. So the virgin birth was a sign that God was getting ready to judge his covenant people. But even though Jesus was judging his covenant people because they had rejected God, the one who was born of a virgin would establish a new covenant with all people, not just Jews. Look at John chapter 12, 31 through 32. Now is the judgment of this world. Now will the ruler of this world be cast out. And when I, Jesus is speaking, am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. This one born of a virgin would save a remnant of the Jews as well. Look what Isaiah said in chapter 10, verse 20 and 21. In that day, the remnant of Israel and the survivors of the house of Jacob will no more lean on him who struck them, but will lean on the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, in truth. A remnant will return, the remnant of Jacob, to the mighty God. The one born of a virgin was a sign. It was also a sign that he would be the king promised to David. Isaiah chapter 9, 6 through 7. You know this verse well. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Listen to this. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end, on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. The one born of a virgin, the one who laid in the manger, would be the king God promised David. He would rule an everlasting kingdom. The one born of a virgin, the one who laid in the manger, would be a sign for all people, not just Jews, but all people on the earth, that God was fulfilling his promise finally to forgive sins. Isaiah says in chapter 10, verse 10, as my hand reached to the kingdoms of the idols, whose carved images were greater than those of Jerusalem and Samaria. The one born of a virgin would be God himself. Look at Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6 again. The one who laid in the manger would be God himself. For unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. And listen to this, his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. The one who was born of a virgin, God told Ahaz, that will be your sign. A sign of both judgment and a sign of salvation. And we understand signs. I was driving down 385 the other day. And if you've ever gotten behind me, sometimes I can forget how fast I'm going. Nothing crazy, just sometimes I lose track. I listen to podcasts, and I saw in the oncoming traffic across the median a vehicle flashing their headlights. We all know, all of us who drive know what that means. There's a cop up ahead, a sign of judgment. When I saw the flashing lights, I immediately looked down at my speedometer. I want you to know I was not speeding. I happened to not be speeding that day. I had to actually set the cruise and was going 75. No, I'm kidding. But we understand signs. I want you to know, regardless of what our culture does with this manger, when you look at the manger, understand that Jesus had to be born of a virgin because that miraculous event was a sign that only God could accomplish. God was going to judge his people, but he was going to save a remnant, and he was going to save the earth. All the families of the earth would be blessed through this one.